In the endless expanse of Central Asia, where the horizon stretches beyond memory and the wind carries whispers of forgotten empires, a story unfolds that would forever change the course of European civilization. Here, beneath the pale dome of sky, where grass waves like an ocean of green and gold, the thunder of countless hooves once echoed across landscapes that knew no boundaries. The steppes hold their secrets well. These are lands where the seasons mark time not by harvests, but by the migration of herds, where the rhythm of life follows the ancient patterns of horse and rider, moving ever onward in search of fresh pastures and new horizons. It is here that our story begins, in the mists of prehistory, when the first nomadic confederations learned to harness the power of the horse and bow. Long before the name Hun struck terror into Roman hearts, these grasslands nurtured a civilization unlike any the sedentary world had ever known. The nomads of Central Asia lived in harmony with their environment, reading the subtle signs of weather and season, understanding the language of their animals, and developing skills that would make them the finest horsemen the world had ever seen. The story of the Huns begins not with their arrival in Europe, but with their ancestors in the distant East, in the confederation known to Chinese chroniclers as the Xiongnu. This great nomadic empire emerged around 200 BCE, when a leader named Modu Xiongnu united the scattered tribes of the Mongolian steppes under his rule. It was a momentous achievement, bringing together peoples who had wandered the grasslands for countless generations, each with their own traditions and territories. Modu's empire was vast beyond imagination. From the forests of Siberia to the deserts of Central Asia, from the mountains of Tibet to the shores of Lake Baikal, his confederation controlled territories larger than any European kingdom. These were not the boundaries drawn on maps by distant rulers, but lands won and held by the strength of mounted warriors who could appear like the wind and strike with the force of lightning. The Xiongnu were masters of a way of life that outsiders struggled to understand. They had no permanent cities, no stone monuments to mark their greatness. Their wealth moved with them in great herds of horses, cattle, and sheep. Their palaces were felt tents that could be dismantled and packed within hours. Their archives were the memories of their elders, who preserved the oral traditions that bound the confederation together. Yet this apparent simplicity masked a sophisticated political organization. The Xiongnu Confederation was a complex hierarchy of tribal leaders, military commanders, and royal clans. At its head stood the Xiongnu, the supreme ruler whose authority extended across the vastness of the steppes. Below him, a network of lesser rulers governed specific territories and tribal groups, all bound together by oaths of loyalty and the promise of shared plunder. The military system of the Xiongnu was built around the principle of total warfare. Every man was a warrior, trained from childhood to ride and fight. Their tactics relied on mobility and archery, using powerful composite bows that could penetrate armor at distances that amazed their enemies. They fought not as individuals, but as coordinated units, wheeling and circling their opponents in formations that had been perfected over generations. For 3 centuries, the Xiongnu Confederation dominated the political landscape of East Asia. Chinese emperors, secure behind their walls and confident in their cultural superiority, found themselves repeatedly humbled by these nomadic warriors. The Great Wall of China, that monument to human determination and engineering skill, was built primarily as a defense against Xiongnu raids. Yet even this massive fortification could not completely stop the mounted archers who knew every pass and valley along its length. The relationship between China and the Xiongnu was complex, marked by periods of warfare alternating with uneasy peace. Chinese diplomats traveled to the felt palaces of the Xiongnu, bearing gifts of silk and gold in exchange for temporary truces. Xiongnu envoys rode into Chinese cities, their strange customs and fierce appearance both fascinating and terrifying to urban populations who had never seen such warriors. Recent genetic studies have revealed fascinating details about these ancient nomads. DNA and archaeological evidence reveal a patchwork of ancestries, pointing to a complex process of mobility and interaction rather than a mass migration. The Xiongnu Confederation was not a single ethnic group, but a multicultural empire that incorporated peoples from across Central Asia. This diversity would prove to be both a strength and a weakness in the centuries to come. Trade flowed along the routes controlled by the Xiongnu, connecting the workshops of China with the markets of Central Asia. Silk, spices, and precious metals moved westward, while furs, amber, and nomadic crafts traveled east. The steppes, far from being an empty wilderness, formed part of a vast commercial network that linked civilizations separated by thousands of miles. The Xiongnu way of life was perfectly adapted to their environment. Their portable dwellings could be erected anywhere suitable grazing was found. Their herds provided not only food, but also materials for clothing, tools, and weapons. Horse milk was fermented into an alcoholic beverage that could sustain warriors on long campaigns. Every aspect of their culture was shaped by the demands of mobility and the harsh beauty of the steppes. Women in Xiongnu society enjoyed a status unknown in most agricultural civilizations. They could own property, inherit titles, and even lead troops in battle. Some of the most powerful shamans and healers were women, their knowledge passed down through generations of oral tradition. The confederation's flexibility in gender roles reflected the practical demands of nomadic life, where survival depended on making use of every individual's talents. The spiritual world of the Xiongnu was rich and complex, built around the worship of Tungri, the eternal blue sky, and the sacred Earth Mother. Their shamans could read omens in the flight of birds and the behavior of animals. They believed in a universe filled with spirits, where the ancestors watched over their descendants, and the natural world possessed a consciousness that demanded respect. As the centuries passed, the Xiongnu Confederation began to face internal pressures that would ultimately lead to its fragmentation. The vast distances that gave them strategic advantage also made central control difficult to maintain. Succession disputes arose when strong leaders died, and rival clans competed for supremacy. The Chinese, learning from their defeats, began to adopt more sophisticated strategies for dealing with their nomadic neighbors. The decisive moment came in 51 BCE, when the Xiongnu Empire split into two rival factions: an eastern horde, which submitted to the Chinese, and a western horde, which was driven into Central Asia. This division marked the beginning of the Great Migration that would eventually bring the descendants of these nomadic warriors to the borders of Europe. The western faction, driven from their traditional territories by Chinese pressure and internal conflicts, began a journey that would last for generations. They moved slowly across Central Asia, following ancient migration routes used by countless peoples before them. This was not a planned invasion, but a gradual displacement, as communities sought new pastures and safety from their enemies. Along the way, these migrating nomads encountered other peoples and absorbed new influences. They learned new techniques of metalworking from the craftsmen of the Altai Mountains. They adopted new military tactics from the warriors of the western steppes. Most importantly, they maintained their essential identity as horse-riding archers while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The archaeological record shows evidence of this great migration in the form of burial sites and cultural artifacts scattered across the steppes. Bronze mirrors, decorative belt plates, and distinctive weapons mark the passage of these nomadic groups as they moved westward. Each generation traveled a little further from their ancestral homeland, carrying with them the memories and traditions of the Xiongnu Confederation. Climate may have played a role in driving this migration. While archaeological evidence does not support the idea of large-scale, rapid movements of people from Central Asia into Europe in the early centuries of the first millennium CE, it nevertheless suggests extensive connections across Eurasia. Periods of drought or harsh winters could force entire communities to seek new territories, while favorable conditions in distant regions attracted settlers seeking better opportunities. The journey across Central Asia was not without its perils. The nomads faced hostile tribes defending their own territories, treacherous mountain passes, and the constant challenge of finding adequate grazing for their herds. Disease could devastate both animals and humans, while harsh weather could trap entire communities in conditions where survival became a daily struggle. Yet these challenges also forged the character that would make the Huns such formidable warriors. Every man, woman, and child learned the skills necessary for survival in a hostile environment. They developed an intimate knowledge of their animals, reading signs of illness or distress that could mean the difference between life and death. They became experts in finding water and shelter in seemingly barren landscapes. The social bonds that held these migrating communities together were strengthened by shared hardship. Leadership was earned through demonstrated competence in the skills that mattered most: warfare, animal husbandry, and the ability to find safe passage through dangerous territory. The strong protected the weak, not from altruism, but from the practical understanding that the survival of the community depended on the contribution of every member. As these Western nomads moved deeper into Central Asia, they began to encounter the peoples who would become their subjects and allies in the centuries to come. The Alans, skilled horsemen who controlled the territories north of the Caucasus Mountains, were among the first to feel the pressure of this migration. Some Alan communities were absorbed into the Nomadic confederation, while others fled westward to escape the newcomers. The process of cultural integration that occurred during this migration was complex and gradual. Marriage alliances between different tribal groups created networks of kinship that transcended ethnic boundaries. Children grew up speaking multiple languages and learning diverse traditions. The confederation that emerged from this mixing process was stronger and more adaptable than any single tribal group could have been. By the 4th century CE, these descendants of the Xiongnu had evolved into something new. They retained the essential skills and values of their ancestors: expertise in mounted warfare, adaptability to changing circumstances, and fierce loyalty to their leaders. But they had also absorbed influences from the many peoples they had encountered during their long journey westward. The name Hun itself may reflect this evolution. Unlike Xiongnu, which had specific meaning in Chinese texts, Hun appears to have been a general term used by various peoples to describe fierce nomadic warriors. The precise linguistic connections remain debated by scholars, but the cultural continuity is clear in the archaeological record and the consistent patterns of nomadic warfare. By 370 CE, these transformed nomads had reached the borders of Europe, where they would encounter peoples and civilizations unlike any they had previously known. The Gothic tribes who controlled the regions north of the Black Sea had grown comfortable in their territories, establishing kingdoms and developing trade relationships with the Roman Empire. They were about to discover that their comfortable existence was about to be shattered by the arrival of warriors from the distant steppes. The first encounters between the Huns and the European peoples were devastating for the established populations. The Gothic king Ermaneric attempted to organize resistance against the newcomers, but traditional European military tactics proved inadequate against Hun mobility and archery. The Goths were accustomed to fighting as heavy infantry, using shields and spears in close formation. Against Hun horse archers who could strike from a distance and retreat before their enemies could respond, these tactics were worse than useless. The collapse of Gothic resistance sent shockwaves throughout Europe. The Visigoths, led by their king Fritigern, sought permission to cross the Danube River into Roman territory. The Ostrogoths found their kingdom simply ceasing to exist as Hun pressure made organized resistance impossible. Hundreds of thousands of refugees fled westward, carrying with them tales of the fierce horsemen who had destroyed their homes. The Romans, observing these developments from behind the security of their fortified frontiers, initially viewed the Hun arrival as an opportunity. Barbarian pressure on other barbarian tribes could serve Roman interests, weakening potential enemies while providing new sources of military recruits. Emperor Valens made the fateful decision to allow Gothic refugees into the empire, believing that they could be controlled and used to strengthen Roman defenses. This decision would prove to be one of the most consequential in Roman history. The Gothic refugees, desperate and angry over their treatment by Roman officials, soon rebelled against their hosts. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE saw Emperor Valens and his army destroyed by the very people he had sought to help. The defeat demonstrated that Roman military superiority was no longer guaranteed and marked the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire. The Huns, while not directly involved in the Battle of Adrianople, had fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe simply through their presence. Their pressure on the Gothic tribes had set in motion the chain of events that led to the catastrophic Roman defeat. This pattern would repeat itself many times in the coming decades, as Hun influence reshaped the political landscape of Europe without the need for direct military intervention. During the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the Huns established themselves in the Carpathian Basin, the region that would become the heart of their European empire. The Hungarian plain, with its excellent grasslands and strategic position, provided an ideal base for their operations. From here, they could threaten the Eastern Roman Empire across the Danube, launch raids into Gaul and Italy, or move north to pressure Germanic tribes in modern-day Germany and Poland. The Hun confederation that emerged in Europe was even more diverse than its Xiongnu ancestors had been. Most of the skeletons carried little genetic contribution from Asian sources. The evidence, in other words, doesn't point to an organized, mass rampage across the steppes. Archaeological and genetic evidence reveals that Attila's empire included not only ethnic Huns from Central Asia, but also Alans, Goths, Sarmatians, and various other tribal groups who had been incorporated into the confederation. This diversity was a source of strength rather than weakness. Germanic warriors brought expertise in siege warfare and heavy cavalry tactics. Alan horsemen contributed their own traditions of mounted archery and animal husbandry. Sarmatian nobles provided knowledge of Roman customs and diplomatic practices. The result was a military and political system more sophisticated and adaptable than any purely nomadic confederation could have achieved. The Hun relationship with the Roman Empire during this period was characterized by a complex mixture of cooperation and conflict. Hun warriors served as mercenaries in Roman armies, their mobility and archery skills proving valuable in campaigns against other barbarian tribes. Roman gold flowed into Hun treasuries in the form of subsidies and tribute payments. Yet this cooperation was always temporary, as the fundamental differences between Roman civilization and Hun culture made lasting peace impossible. Hun society was built around warfare and the distribution of wealth gained through conquest. Leadership was earned through military success and the ability to reward followers with plunder and prestige. This system required constant military activity to maintain social cohesion and political authority. Peace, no matter how profitable in the short term, ultimately threatened the foundations of Hun power. The Romans, for their part, found themselves increasingly dependent on barbarian allies to defend their extensive frontiers. The traditional Roman legions, though still formidable in pitched battle, lacked the mobility necessary to counter the hit-and-run tactics favored by nomadic raiders. Hun mercenaries provided this mobility, but at the cost of making the empire dependent on the very people who threatened its security. Under the leadership of Rugila, who ruled the Hun confederation in the early 5th century, these relationships became more formalized. Rugila was the first Hun ruler to establish systematic diplomatic relations with the Roman Empire, negotiating treaties that recognized Hun territorial claims while providing regular tribute payments. These agreements gave the Hun confederation international legitimacy while ensuring a steady flow of Roman wealth into Hun territories. The tribute system that emerged during this period was unprecedented in scale and sophistication. Roman envoys traveled regularly to Hun courts, bearing gold, silk, and luxury goods that demonstrated imperial acknowledgement of Hun power. Hun diplomats, in turn, visited Roman cities, where their exotic appearance and fierce reputation made them objects of both fear and fascination. Under Rugila's leadership, the Huns began to adopt certain aspects of sedentary civilization while maintaining their essential nomadic character. They established permanent settlements that served as administrative centers and storage facilities for tribute and plunder. These settlements were not cities in the Roman sense, but rather fortified camps that could serve as bases for military operations and meeting places for the Confederation's leadership. The majority of the Hun population remained mobile, following their herds across the grasslands of the Carpathian Basin and maintaining the military readiness that was the foundation of Hun power. This combination of mobility and administrative sophistication gave the Huns advantages that neither purely nomadic nor purely sedentary societies could match. Hun military organization under Rugila reached new levels of sophistication. The traditional nomadic emphasis on mounted archery was supplemented by heavy cavalry units recruited from Germanic allies and infantry formations capable of siege warfare. This military diversity allowed Hun armies to adapt their tactics to different opponents and terrain conditions, making them effective in both open battle and siege operations. The death of Rugila around 434 CE created a succession crisis that briefly threatened the unity of the confederation. Power was initially shared between joint rulers, but political maneuvering soon concentrated authority in the hands of a single individual whose name would become synonymous with barbarian terror throughout Europe. Attila's rise to supreme power among the Huns was not merely the result of inheritance, but represented the triumph of exceptional leadership abilities during a crucial period in Hun history. Attila possessed the rare combination of military genius, diplomatic skill, and ruthless determination necessary to transform a regional confederation into a force capable of challenging the greatest powers of his time. His early campaigns focused on consolidating Hun control over territories that had previously maintained some degree of independence while expanding Hun influence into new regions. The military reforms implemented by Attila created a more centralized command structure that could coordinate the movements of multiple armies across vast distances. These organizational improvements transformed the Hun Confederation from a loose alliance of tribal groups into a unified empire capable of strategic planning and sustained military campaigns. The efficiency of this system would soon be tested in conflicts that would determine the fate of Western civilization. Attila's army represented the culmination of centuries of nomadic military evolution. The core remained the traditional horse archers whose mobility and firepower had made the Huns masters of the steppes. But this foundation was now supplemented by heavy cavalry units equipped with armor and long lances, infantry formations capable of storming fortified positions, and sophisticated siege equipment that could breach the walls of major cities. This military diversity was made possible by the multi-ethnic character of Attila's empire. Gothic warriors provided expertise in heavy cavalry tactics and siege warfare. Alan horsemen contributed their own traditions of mounted combat and animal handling. Sarmatian nobles brought knowledge of Roman military practices and equipment. The result was a military system that combined the best features of nomadic and sedentary warfare. The logistics of maintaining such a diverse and mobile army required innovations in organization and supply. Attila's quartermasters developed systems for provisioning armies that could move hundreds of miles from their base territories. They established supply depots along major campaign routes and negotiated agreements with local populations for the provision of food and fodder. These logistical capabilities allowed Hun armies to conduct extended campaigns far from their homeland. Communication across the vast distances of Attila's empire was maintained through a sophisticated messenger system that utilized the speed and endurance of steppe ponies. Royal messengers could carry orders from Attila's court to commanders operating hundreds of miles away, enabling coordination of military operations across multiple theaters. This communication network also served intelligence-gathering functions, providing Attila with detailed information about conditions throughout his territories and beyond. The diplomatic strategy employed by Attila was as sophisticated as his military organization. He maintained intelligence networks throughout the Roman Empire, using bribery and political manipulation to influence imperial policy. He exploited religious and political divisions within Roman society, supporting different factions when it served Hun interests. This diplomatic warfare proved as destructive to Roman power as direct military campaigns, undermining imperial authority from within while applying external pressure through military threats. Attila's court became a center of international diplomacy, where Roman, Persian, and Germanic envoys competed for Hun favor. These diplomatic missions provided valuable intelligence about political conditions in neighboring territories while demonstrating Hun power to potential enemies and allies. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding these diplomatic exchanges served both practical and symbolic purposes, reinforcing Attila's status as a legitimate ruler while gathering information about foreign capabilities and intentions. The Hun economy under Attila was based primarily on tribute, plunder, and control of trade routes. The Confederation extracted regular payments from both Eastern and Western Roman empires, using the threat of military action to ensure compliance. Hun control over the Danube River and the mountain passes leading into Italy gave them leverage over crucial commercial networks, allowing them to profit from peaceful trade while maintaining the option of military intervention. The legal system that governed Attila's diverse empire blended traditional nomadic customs with practices borrowed from sedentary civilizations. Justice was administered through a combination of tribal law and royal decree, with Attila serving as the supreme judge for important cases. This legal framework provided stability within the confederation while maintaining the flexibility necessary for governing populations with different cultural backgrounds. Religious practices within Attila's empire reflected its multi-ethnic character. While the Huns retained their traditional shamanistic beliefs, they showed tolerance for the religious customs of their subjects and allies. Christian communities continued to exist in Hun-controlled territories, while Germanic peoples maintained their own religious traditions. This religious diversity, like the empire's ethnic diversity, was viewed as a source of strength rather than division. The cultural life of Attila's court blended influences from across Eurasia. Hun nobles wore silk robes imported from China and jewelry crafted by Gothic artisans. They drank wine from Roman goblets while listening to epic poems recited in multiple languages. This cultural synthesis created a unique civilization that was neither purely nomadic nor sedentary, but something entirely new. By 450 CE, Attila had created the most powerful empire in Western Europe. His territories stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, from the Rhine River to the Volga. Within this vast domain, he commanded the loyalty of dozens of tribal groups and maintained armies that could challenge the combined forces of both Roman empires. Yet this very success contained the seeds of future problems, as the maintenance of such power required constant military activity and ever-increasing amounts of tribute and plunder. The invasion of Gaul in 451 CE represented Attila's attempt to achieve permanent control over the wealthy territories of Western Europe. The massive army that crossed the Rhine included not only ethnic Huns, but also Ostrogoths, Gepids, and other Germanic allies. The campaign's objective was not merely plunder, but the establishment of Hun hegemony over territories that would provide access to the Atlantic coast and position Attila to threaten Britain and Spain. The advance through Gaul created panic throughout the Western Roman Empire. Cities that had considered themselves safe behind Roman fortifications suddenly found themselves threatened by an army more powerful than any that had appeared in Western Europe since the Germanic invasions of the previous century. The systematic destruction of Metz, Reims, and other major urban centers demonstrated Hun capabilities while serving as warnings to communities that might consider resistance. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains, or Fields, also called the Battle of the Campus Moriacus, Battle of Chalons, Battle of Troyes, or the Battle of Marica, took place on June 20th, for 51 AD, between a coalition led by the Roman general Flavius Aetius and the Visigothic king Theodoric I, against the Huns and their vassals, commanded by their king, Attila. This engagement would prove to be one of the most significant battles in European history, determining whether Hun power would extend across all of Western Europe or be contained within its existing boundaries. The Roman response to Hun invasion represented a remarkable diplomatic achievement. General Flavius Aetius succeeded in creating a coalition that united traditional enemies in a common cause against the Hun threat. The Visigothic king Theodoric I, whose people had originally fled westward to escape Hun pressure, now joined with his former Roman oppressors to prevent Hun domination of Gaul. The coalition army that assembled to face Attila was as diverse as the Hun forces it opposed. Roman legionaries fought alongside Visigothic warriors, while Alan cavalry units coordinated with Burgundian infantry. Both numbered at least 50,000, and they were composed of infantry, light and heavy cavalry, and archers. This military diversity reflected the multinational character of the resistance to Hun expansion. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains was fought with the fierce intensity characteristic of encounters between professional armies. This new study exposes oversimplified views of Attila's army, which was a sophisticated and complex all-arms force, drawn from the Huns and their many allies and subjects. Hun horse archers inflicted heavy casualties on the coalition forces, but the combined weight of Roman infantry and Gothic cavalry prevented a complete Hun breakthrough. According to legend, Attila consulted his soothsayers before the battle and received omens suggesting that while the Huns would not be defeated, the enemy commander would die in the engagement. This prophecy proved partially accurate, as the Visigothic king Theodoric I was killed during the fighting. Yet the battle's outcome was far from the decisive Hun victory that Attila had expected. As darkness fell over the Catalonian plains, both armies held portions of the battlefield, with neither side able to claim complete victory. This major battle against a coalition of Roman and Visigothic troops ended in a tactical draw, halting Attila's advance into Gaul. The strategic implications of this stalemate were profound, demonstrating the limits of Hun power when confronted by united opposition. Attila withdrew his battered army from the battlefield, marking the first major defeat of his career. While the Huns remained a formidable force, their aura of invincibility was shattered, and their westward advance into Gaul was effectively halted. This withdrawal preserved Hun military strength while avoiding the risks associated with extended operations in hostile territory. The retreat from Gaul did not end Attila's ambitions for western expansion. Instead, he redirected his efforts toward Italy, launching a campaign in 452 CE that would bring Hun forces closer to Rome than they had ever come. The Italian expedition represented Attila's final attempt to achieve the complete domination of Western Europe that had eluded him in Gaul. The Hun invasion of Italy proceeded with the systematic efficiency that characterized all of Attila's military operations. The fortress city of Aquileia, which guarded the approaches to the Italian peninsula, fell after a prolonged siege that demonstrated Hun mastery of advanced siege techniques. The destruction of Aquileia was so complete that the city never fully recovered, serving as a permanent reminder of Hun capabilities. As Hun forces advanced through northern Italy, they encountered minimal resistance from Roman armies that had been weakened by decades of internal conflict and resource depletion. The cities of Milan, Pavia, and other major centers either surrendered without resistance or fell quickly to Hun siege operations. The systematic nature of the Hun advance created panic throughout Italy as refugees fled southward with reports of unprecedented destruction. The meeting between Attila and Pope Leo I in 452 CE became one of the most famous diplomatic encounters in European history. The precise details of their conversation remain unknown to this day, but the meeting resulted in Attila's surprising decision to withdraw from Italy without advancing on Rome. Various explanations have been proposed for this decision, including papal persuasion, concerns about plague in his army, and strategic calculations about the risks of extended operations far from Hun-based territories. Modern historians have debated the reasons for Attila's withdrawal from Italy. Some argue that practical considerations, such as supply difficulties and disease among his troops, forced the retreat. Others suggest that diplomatic negotiations, possibly including promises of increased tribute payments, convinced Attila that his objectives could be achieved without the risks associated with capturing Rome. The truth may combine elements of all these factors. Whatever the reasons for his decision, Attila's withdrawal from Italy marked the end of his western ambitions. The great conqueror returned to his court in the Carpathian Basin, where he began planning new campaigns that would never be realized. The empire he had built through military genius and diplomatic skill was about to face its greatest test with the loss of its supreme leader. Attila's death in 453 CE marked the beginning of the Hun Confederation's rapid collapse. The great leader died on his wedding night, apparently from a hemorrhage, leaving behind a succession crisis that his political and military system could not survive. Without Attila's personal authority to maintain unity among the diverse tribal groups that comprised the Confederation, the empire quickly fragmented into competing factions. The succession crisis that followed Attila's death revealed the fundamental weakness of personalized rule. While Attila had been brilliant at maintaining the loyalty of diverse groups through a combination of military success, diplomatic skill, and generous distribution of wealth, he had not created institutions that could function effectively in his absence. The Confederation's unity had depended entirely on his personal leadership. Attila's sons attempted to maintain control over the empire, but they lacked their father's unique combination of abilities. Military commanders who had served loyally under Attila began to compete for independent power. Allied tribes that had accepted Hun overlordship in exchange for protection and plunder began to reassess their allegiances. The carefully balanced system that had held the Confederation together started to collapse. The Battle of Nidao in 454 CE witnessed the destruction of Hun military power by a coalition of Germanic tribes that had previously served as Hun allies and subjects. The Gepids, Ostrogoths, and other groups that had been incorporated into Attila's empire now turned against their former masters, seeking to recover their independence and establish their own territorial kingdoms. The defeat at Nidao was catastrophic for the Huns, eliminating their military superiority and scattering their remaining forces. The great confederation that had dominated European politics for over half a century simply disintegrated, leaving only scattered remnants. The Gepids, led by King Ardaric, emerged as the dominant power in the former Hun territories, while other Germanic groups carved out their own kingdoms from the ruins of Attila's empire. Following the disaster at Nidao, the surviving Huns found themselves in a position remarkably similar to that of the Gothic refugees who had fled Hun expansion a century earlier. Small groups of Hun warriors sought service as mercenaries with various Roman commanders, while others attempted to establish independent strongholds in remote regions where they might avoid the vengeance of their former subjects. Some Hun groups attempted to maintain their traditional nomadic lifestyle in the regions north of the Black Sea, but they lacked the political organization and military strength necessary to recreate their former power. Others migrated further west, eventually disappearing into the general population of medieval Europe. The great empire that had stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea was reduced to scattered bands of refugees. The speed and completeness of the Hun collapse after Attila's death demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of nomadic political systems. While charismatic leadership could create powerful confederations that incorporated diverse peoples and controlled vast territories, these systems were inherently fragile when faced with succession crises or military defeats. Archaeological evidence suggests that Hun cultural influences persisted in certain regions long after their political power had disappeared. Metalworking techniques, decorative styles, and burial customs show the lasting impact of Hun presence in Central and Eastern Europe. But the Huns as a distinct political entity had effectively ceased to exist by the end of the 5th century. The rapid disappearance of Hun power created opportunities for other peoples to establish their own kingdoms and empires. The Ostrogoths, freed from Hun overlordship, would go on to conquer Italy and establish a kingdom that lasted for nearly a century. The Gepids and Lombards carved out territories in the former Hun heartland. The Western Roman Empire, though temporarily reprieved by Hun collapse, would fall to other barbarian groups within a few decades. The impact of the Hun period on European development extended far beyond their brief moment of political dominance. For a very short time, the Huns had exercised enormous influence over European history, fundamentally altering the demographic and political landscape of the continent. Their pressure on Germanic tribes had initiated the massive population movements that ultimately led to the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the emergence of medieval European kingdoms. The military innovations introduced by the Huns influenced European warfare for centuries to come. Their emphasis on cavalry mobility and archery capabilities inspired similar developments among the peoples they had encountered. The strategic use of mounted archers became a standard feature of medieval military organization, while the political structures developed to coordinate nomadic confederations provided models for later empire builders. Recent genetic studies have provided fascinating new insights into Hun origins and composition. Traditional theories link them to the Xiongnu, the founders of the first nomadic empire of the Mongolian steppe. The Xiongnu Empire dissolved, however, 300 before the Huns appeared in Europe, and there is little archaeological and historical evidence of Huns in the steppe during this time gap. This research suggests that the relationship between the Xiongnu and the European Huns was more complex than previously believed. The genetic evidence confirms the multicultural character of Attila's empire that historical sources had suggested. While these connections confirm the presence of some direct descendants of Xiongnu elites, the study also shows that the population of the Hun Empire in Europe was genetically highly heterogeneous. This diversity was not a weakness, but a source of strength that allowed the Huns to adapt to new environments and incorporate different military traditions. The Hun legacy in European memory proved more durable than their political existence. Medieval chroniclers preserved accounts of Attila's campaigns, often embellishing them with legendary elements that reflected the terror his name continued to inspire centuries after his death. The image of the Huns as savage destroyers of civilization became embedded in European culture, influencing later perceptions of nomadic peoples and contributing to stereotypes that persisted well into the modern era. These cultural memories, while often distorted, preserved awareness of a crucial period in European history. The stories of Attila and his warriors served as cautionary tales about the fragility of civilization and the constant threat posed by barbarian peoples. They also provided inspiration for later rulers who sought to emulate the great conqueror's achievements, though few understood the sophisticated political and military systems that had made Hun success possible. The economic consequences of the Hun period were profound and long-lasting. The disruption of trade routes, the destruction of urban centers, and the massive population movements initiated by Hun expansion fundamentally altered European commercial networks. Cities that had been major commercial centers never fully recovered from Hun attacks, while new trading centers emerged in regions that had gained importance during the period of nomadic dominance. The decline of Roman taxation systems, partly caused by territorial losses to Hun pressure, accelerated the empire's financial collapse and contributed to the transition from ancient to medieval economic structures. The tribute payments extracted by the Huns drained wealth from Roman territories, while the constant threat of attack made long-distance trade increasingly dangerous and expensive. Yet the Hun period also created new economic opportunities. The Confederation's control over vast territories allowed for the protection of certain trade routes, while Hun demands for luxury goods stimulated production in regions that had direct access to their markets. The movement of peoples and cultures during this period facilitated the exchange of technologies and ideas that would influence European development for centuries. The religious implications of the Hun period were equally significant for the development of medieval Europe. The cooperation between Pope Leo I and various barbarian leaders in opposing Hun expansion demonstrated the Church's growing political role as Roman imperial authority declined. The survival of Christian communities in Hun-controlled territories showed the religion's remarkable adaptability to changing political conditions. The eventual conversion of former Hun allies to Christianity contributed to the spread of the faith throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Germanic tribes who had served in Attila's armies carried Christian influences back to their homelands, while the collapse of Hun power created opportunities for missionary activity in regions that had been closed to Christian evangelization. The Hun period also witnessed important developments in Christian theology and practice. The challenges posed by barbarian invasions forced church leaders to develop new strategies for preserving religious knowledge and maintaining ecclesiastical authority during periods of political chaos. Monasteries became centers of learning and cultural preservation, while bishops assumed administrative responsibilities in regions where Roman civil authority had collapsed. Archaeological excavations in former Hun territories have revealed the rich material culture of this remarkable confederation. Hun burial sites contain artifacts from across Eurasia, demonstrating the extensive trade networks that connected their empire to distant regions. Chinese silk, Roman glassware, Germanic weapons, and nomadic metalwork all appear together in these archaeological contexts, illustrating the cosmopolitan character of Hun civilization. The craftsmanship evident in Hun metalwork and jewelry shows a sophisticated artistic tradition that blended influences from multiple cultures. Gold and silver ornaments display techniques learned from Germanic craftsmen, Persian artisans, and Chinese workshops. The distinctive animal motifs that characterized Hun art would influence European decorative traditions for generations, appearing in manuscripts, jewelry, and architectural decoration throughout the early medieval period. Hun burial practices provide insights into their social organization and religious beliefs. Elite graves contain evidence of human sacrifice, suggesting the continuation of ancient steppe traditions that emphasize the warrior's need for servants in the afterlife. The burial of horses with their riders reflects the central importance of these animals in Hun culture and warfare. The study of Hun society has provided valuable insights into the organization of nomadic confederations and their interactions with sedentary civilizations. The Hun example demonstrates how mobile societies could achieve temporary political dominance over much larger and more economically developed populations through superior military organization and strategic leadership. This pattern would be repeated by later nomadic empires, including the Mongols, who would create an even larger confederation several centuries later. The lessons learned from studying Hun political and military systems have enhanced our understanding of how nomadic societies functioned and why they were often able to defeat apparently more powerful sedentary states. The linguistic legacy of the Huns remains largely mysterious, as their language was never systematically recorded and appears to have left few traces in later European languages. However, some scholars have identified possible Hun loanwords in Germanic and Slavic languages, particularly terms related to military equipment and political organization. These linguistic fragments provide tantalizing clues about Hun culture and its interactions with neighboring peoples. The absence of extensive written records in the Hun language reflects their oral culture, where important information was preserved in the memories of specialists rather than in written documents. This oral tradition was perfectly adapted to nomadic life, as written materials were difficult to preserve and transport during constant migrations. The geographic impact of the Hun period can still be traced in modern European place names and archaeological sites. Regions that served as major Hun settlements or battlefields often preserve memories of this period in local traditions and toponymy. The Hungarian plain, which served as the core of Attila's empire, remains one of Europe's most important agricultural and strategic regions. Rivers and mountain passes that figured prominently in Hun military operations are still known by names that may derive from this period. Archaeological sites associated with the Huns continue to yield new information about their culture and its influence on medieval European development. The diplomatic innovations developed during the Hun period influenced European international relations for centuries. The treaty systems that governed Hun-Roman relations established precedents for dealing with powerful barbarian confederations. The intelligence networks maintained by Hun leaders provided models for later diplomatic organizations, while the integration of military threats with political negotiation became a standard feature of medieval statecraft. Hun diplomatic practices also demonstrated the importance of personal relationships in international politics. Attila's ability to maintain complex relationships with multiple Roman factions simultaneously showed how skilled diplomats could exploit divisions within enemy societies. These techniques would be studied and emulated by later medieval rulers. The Hun contribution to military technology extended beyond their famous archery and cavalry tactics. Their siege equipment, developed through contact with Chinese and Roman engineers, represented some of the most advanced military technology of its time. The battering rams, catapults, and siege towers used in Hun attacks on fortified cities incorporated innovations from across the known world. The logistics systems developed to support Hun armies also represented significant advances in military organization. The ability to coordinate supply lines across vast distances, maintain communication between widely separated forces, and adapt to changing strategic circumstances required administrative capabilities that rivaled those of major sedentary empires. Hun influence on European art and culture extended beyond the immediate period of their political dominance. The animal motifs that characterized their decorative traditions appeared in European art for centuries after the Confederation's collapse. Germanic metalworkers continued to employ techniques learned from Hun craftsmen, while artistic styles developed during the Hun period influenced manuscript illumination and jewelry design throughout the early medieval period. The epic traditions that preserved memories of the Hun period became important sources of inspiration for medieval literature. The legends of Attila and his warriors were incorporated into Germanic heroic poetry, where they served as examples of both martial prowess and the dangers of excessive ambition. These literary traditions helped preserve awareness of the Hun period long after the political events had faded from historical memory. Musical traditions may also have been influenced by the Hun period. The songs and instrumental music performed at Attila's court blended influences from across Eurasia, creating new forms that would influence European musical development. While direct evidence of Hun music is limited, archaeological finds of musical instruments and references in contemporary sources suggest a rich musical culture. The Hun impact on European agricultural practices was more limited but still significant in certain regions. Their horse-breeding techniques influenced European cavalry development, while their knowledge of animal husbandry contributed to improvements in livestock management. The demographic changes caused by Hun expansion also led to changes in land use patterns that would persist for generations. The environmental consequences of the Hun period included both destructive and constructive effects. While Hun armies caused significant destruction during their campaigns, their pastoral lifestyle was generally less environmentally damaging than intensive agriculture. The temporary reduction in agricultural activity in some regions allowed for natural regeneration that would benefit later populations. The Hun period also demonstrated the importance of climate and environmental factors in historical development. The favorable grazing conditions of the Hungarian plain were crucial to Hun success, while environmental challenges may have contributed to the Confederation's eventual fragmentation. Understanding these environmental relationships provides insights into the broader patterns of nomadic expansion and contraction. As we consider the broader implications of Hun history, it becomes clear that their impact extended far beyond the immediate destruction they caused during their military campaigns. The Huns served as catalysts for changes that were already beginning to transform European society. The decline of Roman power, the rise of Germanic kingdoms, and the spread of Christianity were all accelerated by Hun pressure. The Hun period marked a crucial transition in European history, representing the end of the classical world and the beginning of the medieval period. The political structures, military technologies, and cultural patterns established during this time would shape European development for centuries to come. The speed with which the Hun Confederation rose and fell also provides important lessons about the nature of political power and historical change. Attila's empire, despite its impressive achievements, lasted barely a century as a major force in European politics. This brevity reminds us that even the most powerful states and leaders are subject to the inexorable forces of historical change. Yet the brevity of Hun political dominance should not diminish appreciation for their remarkable achievements. In less than a century, they created a multi-ethnic confederation that controlled territories stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. They developed military and political systems that successfully challenged both Roman empires simultaneously. They facilitated cultural exchanges that enriched European civilization while preserving their own distinctive traditions. The Hun legacy also demonstrates the complex relationships between nomadic and sedentary societies throughout history. Rather than representing simple opposition between civilization and barbarism, the Hun period shows how mobile and settled peoples could interact in sophisticated ways that benefited both sides. The cultural synthesis that emerged from these interactions contributed to the richness and diversity of medieval European civilization. Modern archaeological methods continue to reveal new information about Hun society and its impact on European development. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of Hun craftsmanship and trade connections that was unknown to earlier generations of scholars. Genetic studies are providing new insights into the origins and composition of Hun populations, while environmental archaeology is revealing information about the landscapes they inhabited. These new discoveries remind us that our understanding of the Hun period continues to evolve as new evidence becomes available. Each archaeological site and genetic study adds to our knowledge of these remarkable people and their role in shaping European history. The picture that emerges is far more complex and nuanced than the simple narratives of barbaric destruction that characterized earlier historical accounts. The Hun period also provides important perspectives on the relationships between political power and cultural identity. Despite controlling vast territories and ruling over diverse populations, the Huns maintained their distinctive cultural identity while also adapting to new circumstances. This balance between tradition and innovation helps explain both their remarkable success and their ultimate fragmentation. The religious and philosophical implications of the Hun period extend beyond immediate political and military developments. The encounter between nomadic and sedentary worldviews during this time contributed to intellectual developments that would influence European thought for centuries. The synthesis of different cultural traditions created new approaches to understanding the relationship between human society and the natural world. Hun shamanic traditions, with their emphasis on the spiritual significance of natural phenomena, provided alternative perspectives on the relationship between humans and their environment. While these traditions were not formally preserved in written form, They influenced popular beliefs and practices throughout Central and Eastern Europe. The diplomatic protocols developed during the Hun period also contributed to the evolution of international law and diplomatic practice. The complex negotiations between Hun leaders and Roman officials established precedents for dealing with conflicts between different types of political systems. These precedents would prove valuable in later medieval diplomacy as European rulers struggled to maintain relationships with various nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples. The Hun emphasis on personal loyalty and military valor also influenced European concepts of nobility and honor. The ideal of the warrior leader who earned authority through demonstrated competence rather than inherited privilege provided an alternative to Roman concepts of aristocracy based on birth and wealth. This alternative model would play an important role in the development of medieval European nobility. As the centuries passed after the Hun confederation's collapse, memories of Attila and his warriors became increasingly legendary. Medieval chroniclers embellished accounts of Hun campaigns with supernatural elements, transforming historical figures into mythical heroes and villains. These legendary accounts, while historically unreliable, preserved awareness of the Hun period and its significance for European development. The transformation of Hun history into legend also demonstrates the power of oral tradition in preserving cultural memory. Despite the absence of written Hun records, stories of their achievements were passed down through generations of European peoples who had been affected by their expansion. These oral traditions provided the foundation for later written accounts that, despite their embellishments, preserved important information about Hun society and its impact. The Hun period ultimately represents one of the most remarkable examples of rapid political and cultural transformation in European history. Within the span of a single century, nomadic warriors from the distant steppes of Central Asia created an empire that challenged the greatest powers of the ancient world. Their achievements demonstrate the potential for small groups with superior organization and leadership to achieve influence far beyond what their numbers might suggest. The lessons of Hun history remain relevant to our understanding of political and cultural change in the modern world. The ability of the Huns to adapt to new circumstances while maintaining their essential identity provides insights into the dynamics of cultural encounter and transformation. Their diplomatic innovations demonstrate the importance of understanding different cultural perspectives in international relations. The Hun Confederation also illustrates the importance of leadership in historical development. Without Attila's exceptional abilities, it is unlikely that the Confederation would have achieved the level of success it did. Yet his death also demonstrated the dangers of personalized rule and the importance of creating institutions that can survive changes in leadership. The environmental lessons of the Hun period are also significant for our contemporary world. The relationship between climate, resources, and political stability that influenced Hun history continues to shape international relations today. Understanding how past societies adapted to environmental challenges provides insights that may prove valuable in addressing current global challenges. As we reflect on the complete history of the Huns, from their origins in the eastern steppes to their ultimate disappearance in medieval Europe, we see a story that encompasses some of the most dramatic and consequential developments in human history. Their brief moment of political dominance had effects that lasted for centuries, shaping the development of European civilization in ways that continue to influence our world today. The vast steppes where their story began remain largely unchanged, still swept by the winds that once carried the sounds of countless hooves and the cries of mounted warriors. In the quiet of these landscapes, it is possible to imagine the great migrations that brought nomadic peoples from the heart of Asia to the borders of Europe. The grass still waves in patterns that seem to echo the movements of ancient armies, while archaeological sites preserve the material remains of cultures that once held the fate of civilizations in their hands. In the settled regions where the Huns established their empire, modern cities have grown over the sites of ancient battlefields and diplomatic meetings. The Hungarian plain still provides rich agricultural land, though its strategic importance has changed with developments in transportation and military technology. Yet traces of the Hun period can still be found by those who know where to look in museum collections, archaeological sites, and the genetic heritage of modern populations. The rivers and mountain passes that figured prominently in Hun military operations continue to serve as important transportation routes, though modern travelers move by different means and for different purposes than the warriors and traders of Attila's time. The Danube still flows past the sites where Roman and Hun diplomats once negotiated treaties that determined the fate of nations, while the mountain passes of the Carpathians still provide routes between different regions of Europe. The churches and monasteries that survived the Hun period preserve manuscripts and artifacts that document this crucial time in European history. Modern historians continue to study these sources, seeking new insights into the nature of Hun society and its impact on European development. Each new archaeological discovery or scholarly analysis adds to our understanding of these remarkable people and their role in shaping the medieval world. The genetic legacy of the Hun period continues to be revealed through modern DNA studies that trace the movements of ancient populations across vast distances and through many centuries. These scientific investigations confirm what historical sources had suggested about the multi-ethnic character of Hun society, while revealing new details about the complex processes of migration and cultural interaction that characterize this period. Museums throughout Europe preserve artifacts from the Hun period, allowing modern visitors to see the material remains of this ancient confederation. The weapons, jewelry, and everyday objects displayed in these collections provide tangible connections to people who lived and died more than 15 centuries ago. The craftsmanship evident in these artifacts demonstrates the sophistication of Hun culture and its connections to craftsmen and traders throughout Eurasia. Educational institutions continue to study the Hun period as part of their exploration of medieval European history. Students learn about Attila and his confederation as examples of how small groups can achieve disproportionate historical influence through superior organization and leadership. The diplomatic innovations and military technologies developed during this period continue to provide insights relevant to contemporary political and military analysis. The languages spoken throughout Central and Eastern Europe still preserve traces of the complex cultural interactions that occurred during the Hun period. While the Hun language itself has been lost, its influence may survive in loanwords and grammatical structures that reflect the linguistic mixing that occurred when nomadic and sedentary populations came into contact. The agricultural landscapes of modern Europe still reflect patterns of settlement and land use that were influenced by the demographic changes initiated during the Hun period. The movement of peoples caused by Hun expansion led to new patterns of cultivation and animal husbandry that would shape European agricultural development for centuries. Modern farming communities in these regions are the distant inheritors of traditions that were transformed during this crucial period. The political boundaries of modern European nations only indirectly reflect the territorial divisions that existed during the Hun period. Yet the fundamental patterns of cultural and linguistic difference that characterize contemporary Europe were significantly influenced by the population movements and cultural interactions of the 5th century. The diversity that enriches modern European civilization has roots that extend back to the complex mixing of peoples that occurred during the age of the Great Migrations. As night settles over the landscapes where the Huns once rode, the wind carries whispers of ancient memories across grasslands that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The stars that shine down on these quiet fields once guided nomadic warriors across vast distances, while the rivers that reflect their light once carried the boats of traders and diplomats who connected the scattered regions of Attila's empire. In the silence of these ancient landscapes, it becomes possible to appreciate the full scope of the Hun achievement and its lasting significance for European history. Their empire, though brief in duration, represented one of the most remarkable political and military accomplishments of the ancient world. The speed with which they rose to dominance and the completeness of their eventual collapse serve as reminders of the unpredictable nature of historical change and the temporary character of all human achievements. Yet the temporary nature of Hun political power should not obscure the permanent changes they brought to European civilization. The kingdoms and cultures that emerged from the chaos they created would shape European development for centuries. The military technologies and political innovations they introduced would influence medieval warfare and statecraft. The cultural synthesis that resulted from their expansion would enrich European civilization with influences from across Eurasia. The peaceful darkness that now covers the sites of ancient Hun settlements and battlefields provides a fitting conclusion to their remarkable story. The thunder of hooves has given way to the gentle sounds of wind through grass. The clash of weapons has been replaced by the quiet activities of agricultural communities. The urgent negotiations of medieval diplomats have been succeeded by the scholarly discussions of modern historians. In this tranquil setting, let the extraordinary story of the Huns accompany you into peaceful sleep. Remember how these nomadic warriors, emerging from the vast steppes of Central Asia, transformed the political landscape of Europe through their remarkable combination of military skill, diplomatic innovation, and cultural adaptability. Their brief but brilliant moment of historical dominance demonstrates how small groups with exceptional leadership can achieve influence that extends far beyond their apparent capabilities. As you drift towards sleep, consider how the consequences of their actions continue to shape our world today. The medieval kingdoms that arose from the ruins of their empire provided the foundation for modern European nations. The cultural exchanges they facilitated enriched European civilization with influences from distant lands. The military and political innovations they introduced influenced European development for centuries. Let the wind that once carried Hun war cries across the steppes now carry you gently into dreams. In the quiet darkness where archaeological sites preserve the remains of their civilization, find the peaceful rest that eluded these restless warriors during their brief but extraordinary moment in history. The Great Migration has ended, the empire has fallen, and the nomadic confederation has dissolved into the mists of time, leaving behind only the enduring changes they wrought in the structure of European civilization. Sleep now, knowing that even the mightiest storms of history eventually pass, but their effects continue to shape the world for generations yet to come. In the gentle rhythm of your breathing, hear the echo of ancient winds that once swept across endless grasslands, carrying the dreams and ambitions of peoples whose names have been largely forgotten, but whose actions changed the course of human history forever. Yet even as the Hun Confederation dissolved into the mists of history, their story was far from over. The scattered remnants of Attila's great empire would continue to influence European development in ways both subtle and profound. The seeds they had planted during their century of dominance would grow into new forms of civilization, carrying forward the legacy of the steppes into the medieval world. In the years following the disaster at Nidao, small groups of Hun warriors found themselves scattered across the European landscape like leaves blown by autumn winds. Some sought service as mercenaries with the very Roman generals who had once feared their approach. Others retreated to remote mountain valleys, where they could maintain their traditional way of life away from the vengeance of former subjects. A few attempted to establish new confederations among the nomadic peoples who still roamed the regions north of the Black Sea. These surviving Hun groups, though no longer a unified political force, carried with them the accumulated knowledge of their people. They preserved the military techniques that had made their ancestors masters of the battlefield, the diplomatic skills that had enabled Attila to play great powers against each other, and the cultural traditions that had sustained nomadic society through countless generations of migration and conquest. In the Gothic kingdoms that emerged from the ruins of Attila's empire, Hun influence persisted in subtle but important ways. Gothic nobles who had served in Hun armies retained their knowledge of advanced military tactics and siege warfare. The administrative systems developed to govern multi-ethnic populations during the Hun period provided models for the complex kingdoms that would characterize early medieval Europe. The Ostrogothic kingdom established in Italy by Theodoric the Great showed clear evidence of lessons learned during the Hun period. Theodoric's ability to maintain control over diverse populations, his sophisticated diplomatic relationships with other barbarian kingdoms and the Eastern Roman Empire, and his promotion of cultural synthesis between Gothic and Roman traditions all reflected political innovations first developed during the age of Hun dominance. In the emerging Frankish kingdoms of Gaul, military innovations introduced during the Hun period continued to influence European warfare. The emphasis on cavalry that would become characteristic of medieval knightly culture drew heavily on techniques first perfected by Hun horse archers and their allied heavy cavalry units. The stirrup, which would revolutionize European mounted combat, may have been introduced through contact with nomadic peoples during the Hun period. The Lombard kingdom that eventually conquered much of Italy also showed Hun influence in its political structure and military organization. The Lombards had been among the Germanic tribes incorporated into Attila's confederation, and their later success in establishing a durable kingdom reflected lessons learned about governing diverse populations and maintaining military effectiveness in foreign territories. Even in regions that had successfully resisted Hun expansion, the impact of their presence could be seen in changed military practices and diplomatic procedures. The Byzantine Empire, heir to the Eastern Roman Empire that had paid tribute to Attila, developed new strategies for dealing with nomadic peoples based on their experience during the Hun period. The diplomatic protocols established in negotiations with Hun leaders provided precedents for later Byzantine relationships with Avars, Bulgars, and other steppe peoples. The religious communities that had survived the Hun period carried forward important institutional innovations developed during those turbulent years. Monasteries that had served as refuges during Hun raids became centers of learning and cultural preservation that would play crucial roles in the development of medieval European civilization. The experience of maintaining Christian communities under non-Christian rulers provided valuable lessons for missionary activities among the pagan peoples of Central and Northern Europe. Archaeological evidence suggests that Hun cultural influences persisted in material culture long after their political disappearance. Distinctive metalworking techniques, decorative motifs, and burial practices associated with the Hun period continued to appear in various European regions throughout the 6th and 7th centuries. These cultural survivals demonstrate how deeply Hun influences had penetrated European society during their brief period of dominance. The genetic legacy of the Hun period also continued to influence European populations in ways that are only now being understood through modern DNA analysis. The complex mixing of peoples that occurred during the Great Migrations had created new population patterns that would persist for centuries. The multi-ethnic character of Hun society had facilitated genetic exchanges that enriched the diversity of medieval European populations. Trade routes that had been established or protected during the Hun period continued to function long after the Confederation's collapse, connecting European markets with suppliers in Central Asia and beyond. The commercial networks that had supplied Attila's court with luxury goods from across Eurasia evolved into the trade systems that would support medieval European economic development. The linguistic influences of the Hun period, though difficult to trace directly, may have contributed to the evolution of several European language families. The interaction between nomadic and sedentary populations during the Great Migrations facilitated linguistic borrowing that enriched vocabulary related to military, political, and technological concepts. Words related to horsemanship, archery, and political organization may preserve traces of languages spoken in Attila's multi-ethnic confederation. In the realm of law and governance, innovations developed during the Hun period continued to influence European political development. The legal frameworks created to govern diverse populations with different cultural traditions provided models for the complex legal systems that would emerge in medieval European kingdoms. The concept of confederation government that had enabled the Huns to incorporate numerous tribal groups would resurface in various forms throughout medieval European history. The memory of Hun achievements also provided inspiration for later conquerors and empire builders. Charlemagne's efforts to create a unified European empire drew conscious inspiration from classical models, but the techniques he employed for governing diverse populations and maintaining military effectiveness across vast territories showed clear similarities to methods pioneered during the Hun period. The Viking expansion that would shake European civilization several centuries later employed many of the same strategies that had made the Huns so effective. The combination of superior military technology, political innovation, and cultural adaptability that characterized Viking success had been prefigured in the earlier achievements of Attila's confederation. Even the Mongol conquests of the 13th century, which would create the largest contiguous land empire in human history, showed the continued relevance of political and military innovations first developed during the Hun period. The Mongol ability to incorporate diverse populations into effective military and administrative systems drew on organizational principles that had been tested centuries earlier in the steppes of Central Asia. The transformation of European military technology during the medieval period owed significant debts to innovations introduced during the Hun era. The development of heavy cavalry that would dominate European battlefields for centuries represented a synthesis of nomadic mobility with European metalworking skills and Germanic traditions of warrior culture. This synthesis had been pioneered in the mixed armies that served under Attila's command. Siege warfare techniques that became standard features of medieval military practice had been refined during Hun campaigns against fortified cities. The combination of traditional nomadic mobility with sophisticated siege equipment had enabled Hun armies to capture strongholds that had previously been considered impregnable. These techniques continued to evolve in the armies of medieval kingdoms that inherited territories once controlled by the Hun Confederation. The diplomatic innovations of the Hun period also continued to influence European international relations throughout the medieval period. The treaty systems that had governed Hun-Roman relations provided precedents for complex negotiations between medieval kingdoms. The use of tribute payments, hostage exchanges, and commercial agreements to maintain political relationships had been perfected during the age of Hun dominance. Intelligence-gathering techniques developed by Hun leaders influenced the growth of diplomatic services throughout medieval Europe. The networks of spies and informants that had provided Attila with detailed information about conditions throughout the Roman Empire became models for later intelligence operations. The integration of military threats with diplomatic negotiation that had characterized Hun policy became standard practice in medieval statecraft. The cultural synthesis that had characterized Hun society continued to influence European artistic and intellectual development. The blending of influences from across Eurasia that had created the distinctive material culture of Attila's court provided inspiration for the multicultural artistic traditions that would enrich medieval European civilization. Manuscript illumination, metalworking, and textile production throughout medieval Europe showed influences that could be traced back to the cultural exchanges facilitated during the Hun period. The animal motifs that had decorated Hun weapons and jewelry continued to appear in European decorative arts for centuries after the Confederation's political collapse. Musical traditions may also have been influenced by the cultural synthesis that occurred during the Hun period. The songs and instrumental pieces performed at Attila's court had brought together musical influences from across Eurasia, creating new forms that would contribute to the development of medieval European music. While direct evidence is limited, the cosmopolitan character of Hun court culture suggests that musical innovation was part of the broader cultural creativity of this period. The educational institutions that emerged during the early medieval period also showed the influence of lessons learned during the Hun era. The schools and libraries established by religious communities had been shaped by their experience of preserving knowledge during periods of political instability. The curriculum and teaching methods developed during this formative period reflected the need to maintain cultural continuity while adapting to changing political circumstances. The urban planning and architectural developments of the early medieval period were influenced by experience gained during the Hun period. Cities that had survived Hun attacks had learned valuable lessons about defensive architecture and urban organization. The fortification systems and administrative buildings constructed during the centuries following Hun collapse reflected both the lessons learned from defending against nomadic armies and the organizational innovations that had made Hun governance effective. Agricultural innovations that would support medieval European population growth also showed influences from the Hun period. The horse breeding techniques and animal husbandry practices that had been refined during the age of nomadic dominance contributed to improvements in agricultural productivity. The demographic changes caused by Hun expansion had also led to new patterns of land use that would prove beneficial for medieval agricultural development. The maritime developments that would eventually enable European expansion beyond the continent also had connections to innovations first developed during the Hun period. The organizational techniques that had enabled Hun leaders to coordinate operations across vast distances provided models for the complex logistics required for long-distance sea voyages. The cultural adaptability that had characterized Hun society offered precedents for the successful establishment of European colonies in distant lands. Even the intellectual developments that would characterize medieval European scholarship showed influences from the Hun period. The encounter between different cultural traditions that had occurred during the Great Migrations had demonstrated the value of synthesizing knowledge from diverse sources. This lesson would prove crucial during the preservation and transmission of classical knowledge that occurred in medieval monasteries and schools. The legal scholarship that would develop during the medieval period was influenced by the experience of governing diverse populations during the Hun era. The complex legal systems that emerged in medieval European kingdoms drew on precedents established during earlier attempts to create unified legal frameworks for multi-ethnic populations. The concept of written law codes that could govern diverse communities had been tested during the Hun period and would prove crucial for medieval political development. The emergence of vernacular literatures during the medieval period was also influenced by the cultural mixing that had occurred during the Hun era. The oral traditions that had been brought together in Attila's cosmopolitan court had contributed to the development of new narrative forms that would influence European literary development for centuries. The economic systems that supported medieval European civilization showed the continuing influence of innovations developed during the Hun period. The tributary relationships that had characterized Hun governance provided models for the feudal obligations that would structure medieval society. The integration of military service with economic relationships that had been perfected in nomadic confederations became a fundamental feature of medieval political organization. The banking and commercial practices that would enable medieval European economic growth also drew on precedents established during the Hun period. The complex systems for managing tribute payments and redistributing wealth that had characterized Attila's empire provided experience in handling the sophisticated financial relationships that would support medieval trade and industry. The technological innovations that would transform medieval European society continued to reflect influences from the Hun period. The metallurgical techniques that had been perfected in the workshops serving Hun armies contributed to the development of improved weapons, tools, and agricultural implements. The engineering knowledge that had been applied to siege warfare during Hun campaigns influenced the construction of bridges, fortifications, and other infrastructure projects. As the centuries passed and Europe gradually evolved into the complex civilization that would eventually expand to dominate much of the world, the influences originating during the Hun period remained embedded in the foundations of European culture. The political innovations, military technologies, cultural syntheses, and institutional developments that had first been tested in Attila's multi-ethnic confederation continued to shape European development in ways both obvious and subtle. The great cathedrals that would rise to dominate medieval European cities were built by communities that had learned organizational techniques from ancestors who had survived the Hun period. The universities that would preserve and extend human knowledge were founded on educational principles that had been refined during the cultural encounters of the Great Migration period. The kingdoms and empires that would carry European influence to distant continents employed governmental techniques that had been pioneered in the steppes of Central Asia. Even the exploration voyages that would bring Europeans into contact with distant continents employed navigational and organizational techniques that could trace their ancestry back to the nomadic expertise developed during the Hun period. The cultural adaptability that would enable European colonizers to establish settlements in diverse environments had been prefigured in the multi-ethnic experimentation that had characterized Attila's empire. The scientific revolution that would transform European understanding of the natural world was built on intellectual foundations that included lessons learned during the Hun period. The recognition that knowledge could be gained from diverse cultural sources, the understanding that practical experience was as valuable as theoretical speculation, and the appreciation for systematic observation of natural phenomena had all been reinforced during the cultural exchanges that occurred during the Great Migrations. The democratic institutions that would eventually emerge in European political development also showed the influence of Hun precedents. The concept that political authority should be earned through demonstrated competence rather than inherited through birth had been tested in nomadic confederations where leadership depended on military success and the ability to maintain the loyalty of diverse followers. The industrial technologies that would revolutionize European society during the modern period drew on manufacturing techniques and organizational principles that had been developed during the Hun era. The ability to coordinate complex production processes involving numerous specialists had been pioneered in the workshops that supplied Hun armies with weapons, equipment, and luxury goods. As we trace these connections across the centuries, a remarkable picture emerges of how the brief Hun dominance of European politics created influences that would persist and evolve throughout the medieval period and beyond. The thundering hooves that had once carried terror across European battlefields had set in motion changes that would eventually carry European civilization to global prominence. In the quiet darkness of the modern world, where electric lights have replaced the flickering flames that once illuminated Hun encampments, we can still trace the subtle influences that connect our contemporary civilization to the nomadic warriors who rode out of the eastern steppes 15 centuries ago. The technologies we use, the political systems that govern us, the cultural traditions that enrich our lives, and even the genetic heritage that shapes our physical characteristics all carry traces of that remarkable period when the fate of European civilization hung in the balance. The internet that connects modern communities across vast distances employs organizational principles that echo the communication networks that once linked the scattered components of Attila's empire. The global economy that integrates production and consumption across continents reflects the same understanding of the benefits of cultural and economic exchange that had made Hun confederation possible. The democratic ideals that modern societies strive to implement draw on concepts of earned authority and consensual governance that had been tested in the steppes during the Great Migrations. The recognition that diverse populations can be successfully integrated into unified political systems had been demonstrated in the multi-ethnic experiment that was Attila's empire. Even the space exploration programs that represent the most advanced achievements of modern technology employ organizational techniques and cultural principles that can trace their ancestry back to the Great Migrations that brought the Huns from the heart of Asia to the borders of Europe. The ability to coordinate complex operations across vast distances, to adapt to challenging environments, and to integrate diverse specialists into effective teams had all been pioneered by the nomadic confederations that once dominated the Eurasian steppes. As you settle into peaceful sleep, let these connections remind you of the profound continuities that link our modern world to the ancient past. The comfortable bed in which you rest, the secure home that shelters you, the stable society that protects you, and the rich culture that enriches your life all owe debts to the innovations and achievements of peoples whose names have largely been forgotten, but whose contributions continue to shape our world. In your dreams tonight, perhaps you will glimpse the vast steppes where our story began, where the wind still carries echoes of ancient migrations across grasslands that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Perhaps you will see the faces of those long-dead warriors whose brief moment of historical prominence created changes that continue to influence our lives today. Rest peacefully in the knowledge that you are part of a continuous human story that stretches back through countless generations to the earliest nomadic peoples who learned to harness the speed of horses and the power of the bow. The same creativity, adaptability, and courage that enabled the Huns to build their remarkable empire continues to drive human achievement in our own time. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing echo the ancient rhythms of migration and settlement that have always characterized human civilization. In the quiet darkness that surrounds you, feel the presence of all the generations that have passed their knowledge and achievements down to us, creating the foundation upon which our modern world is built. Sleep now, knowing that you are the inheritor of a remarkable legacy that includes not only the achievements of settled civilizations, but also the innovations and insights of nomadic peoples who understood that true strength comes from the ability to adapt, to move, and to transform challenges into opportunities. The Great Migration may have ended, but the human journey continues, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of all who have contributed to the ongoing story of our species. In the stillness of the night, where archaeological sites preserve the physical remains of ancient civilizations and genetic sequences preserve the biological heritage of vanished peoples, the past and present merge in the continuous flow of human experience. The Huns may have disappeared as a political entity, but their contributions to that flow continue to enrich and guide our collective human journey toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The wind that tonight whispers through the ruins of ancient settlements carries with it not only the memory of those who once called these places home, but also the seeds of stories yet to be told. In the genetic heritage of modern populations, in the cultural traditions that have been passed down through countless generations, in the very landscape itself, the influence of the Hun period continues to unfold in ways both subtle and profound. Consider the children who play today in the fields where Hun warriors once practiced their archery, unaware that their games of running and hiding echo the ancient tactics that once determined the fate of empires. The skills they develop through play, coordination, strategy, teamwork, adaptation to changing circumstances, are the same fundamental abilities that enabled nomadic peoples to survive and thrive in challenging environments for countless generations. In the schools where modern students learn about history, science, and technology, they are unconsciously absorbing lessons that trace their origins back to the cultural encounters of the Great Migration period. The scientific method itself, with its emphasis on observation, hypothesis testing, and adaptation of theories based on new evidence, reflects the same intellectual flexibility that enabled nomadic societies to adapt successfully to new environments and challenges. The libraries and universities where scholars preserve and extend human knowledge employ organizational principles that were refined during the Hun period. The ability to maintain coherent institutions while incorporating new ideas and influences from diverse sources had been tested in the multi-ethnic confederations that once dominated the Eurasian steppes. Even the global communication networks that connect modern societies employ routing and redundancy principles that echo the diplomatic and intelligence systems developed by nomadic leaders like Attila. The Internet's packet switching protocols, which ensure that information can reach its destination even when some routes are blocked or disrupted, parallel the communication strategies that enabled steppe confederations to maintain coordination across vast and often hostile territories. The international organizations that attempt to coordinate policies among diverse nations face challenges remarkably similar to those confronted by leaders of nomadic confederations. The need to balance local autonomy with central coordination, to maintain cohesion while respecting cultural differences, and to adapt quickly to changing circumstances requires skills that were first developed in the mobile societies of the steppes. Modern military organizations continue to study and apply principles that were pioneered during the Hun period. The integration of different specialized units into coherent fighting forces, the use of mobility and surprise to offset numerical disadvantages, and the importance of logistics and communication in maintaining military effectiveness are all lessons that trace their origins back to the innovations of nomadic warfare. The business strategies employed by multinational corporations show remarkable parallels to the organizational techniques developed by nomadic confederations. The ability to operate effectively across different cultural and regulatory environments, to adapt products and services to local conditions while maintaining overall coherence, and to manage complex supply chains across vast distances all require skills that were first perfected by peoples who live their entire lives in motion. The environmental challenges facing modern societies also echo problems that nomadic peoples learned to address through careful observation and adaptive management. The need to balance resource consumption with long-term sustainability, to read subtle environmental signals that indicate changing conditions, and to maintain flexibility in the face of unpredictable climate variations requires the same kind of ecological wisdom that enabled steppe societies to thrive for millennia. The genetic research that reveals the continuing influence of ancient migrations also demonstrates the remarkable resilience and adaptability of human populations. The DNA sequences that connect modern Europeans to ancient Xiongnu populations tell stories of survival, adaptation, and cultural transmission that span thousands of years and countless generations. In the laboratories where scientists decode these genetic messages, researchers employ analytical techniques that reflect the same careful attention to detail and systematic approach that nomadic peoples once used to read the signs of weather, season, and animal behavior. The ability to detect subtle patterns in complex data and to draw meaningful conclusions from limited evidence requires skills that have been essential to human survival since our species first emerged. The archaeological sites where researchers uncover evidence of ancient Hun settlements and battlefields continue to yield new insights into the complexity and sophistication of nomadic civilizations. Each artifact recovered from the soil adds to our understanding of how these remarkable peoples lived, fought, traded, and interacted with their neighbors across vast distances and cultural boundaries. The museums where these artifacts are preserved and displayed serve functions remarkably similar to the oral traditions that once preserved the cultural knowledge of nomadic societies. Both institutions exist to maintain connection between past and present, to ensure that the wisdom and achievements of earlier generations continue to inform and inspire contemporary life. The conservation efforts that protect these archaeological sites reflect a growing recognition of the value of nomadic heritage and its contributions to human civilization. The landscapes where Hun armies once roamed are increasingly understood as cultural resources that deserve protection and study, not merely as empty spaces waiting for development. The tourism industry that brings visitors to these historical sites creates economic opportunities for modern communities while fostering appreciation for the complexity and richness of nomadic civilizations. Travelers who walk through the remains of Hun settlements gain first-hand experience of the environments that shaped these remarkable peoples and the challenges they successfully overcame. The educational programs that interpret these sites for visitors employ storytelling techniques that echo the oral traditions once used to preserve and transmit cultural knowledge in nomadic societies. The ability to communicate complex historical information through narrative, to make distant events relevant to contemporary audiences, and to inspire emotional connection with the past requires skills that have always been essential to cultural continuity. The documentary films and books that bring the story of the Huns to modern audiences continue the ancient tradition of preserving and sharing cultural memory through storytelling. The techniques used to reconstruct historical events from limited evidence, to create compelling narratives that respect historical accuracy while engaging contemporary audiences, and to communicate across cultural and temporal boundaries all draw on traditions that were refined during the great age of nomadic dominance. The digital technologies that enable these modern forms of storytelling also reflect principles that were pioneered during the Hun period. The ability to integrate diverse types of information into coherent presentations, to adapt content for different audiences and delivery systems, and to maintain the essential message while varying the format requires the same kind of flexible intelligence that enabled nomadic societies to adapt to constantly changing circumstances. The video games and virtual reality experiences that allow modern audiences to explore reconstructed historical environments employ simulation techniques that parallel the mental modeling skills that nomadic peoples use to navigate unfamiliar territories and predict the consequences of different strategic choices. The social media platforms that connect modern communities across vast distances create networks that echo the kinship and alliance systems that once held nomadic confederations together. The ability to maintain relationships across geographical and cultural boundaries, to share information rapidly across extended networks, and to coordinate collective action among diverse participants requires social skills that were essential to nomadic survival. The crowdsourcing projects that enable large numbers of volunteers to contribute to historical research reflect the same understanding of collective capability that made nomadic confederations possible. The recognition that diverse perspectives and skills can be integrated to achieve objectives that would be impossible for any individual to accomplish alone was fundamental to the success of peoples like the Huns. The climate change research that attempts to understand how human societies can adapt to changing environmental conditions draws on lessons learned from nomadic peoples who spent millennia developing strategies for survival in unpredictable environments. The ability to read environmental signals, to maintain flexibility in resource use, and to coordinate responses across large areas requires skills that were perfected by societies that lived in constant movement. The renewable energy technologies that offer hope for sustainable human development employ principles that nomadic peoples understood intuitively. The use of natural forces like wind and solar energy, the importance of working with rather than against environmental patterns, and the need to maintain systems that can operate reliably in diverse conditions all reflect insights that were fundamental to nomadic survival. The space exploration programs that represent humanity's expansion beyond Earth employ organizational and technological principles that trace their origins back to the great migrations that brought nomadic peoples across continents. The ability to operate in hostile environments, to maintain complex systems far from support bases, and to adapt to unexpected challenges requires skills that were first developed by peoples who spent their lives moving through unfamiliar territories. The International Space Station that orbits above us as we sleep represents the same kind of cooperative achievement that made nomadic confederations possible. The ability to coordinate efforts among diverse participants, to maintain complex systems through shared responsibility, and to work together despite cultural and political differences requires the same skills that enabled peoples like the Huns to create and maintain their remarkable empire. As astronauts look down at Earth from their orbital perspective, they see the same fundamental patterns that nomadic peoples understood from ground level. The interconnectedness of all regions, the importance of understanding natural cycles and patterns, and the need for human communities to work together if they hope to thrive in challenging environments. The satellite communication systems that enable these space-based observations also reflect organizational principles that were pioneered during the nomadic period. The need to maintain communication across vast distances, to ensure that information can be routed around obstacles and failures, and to coordinate activities among widely dispersed participants requires the same kind of systematic thinking that enabled steppe confederations to operate effectively across continental distances. The GPS systems that guide modern travelers through unfamiliar territories employ navigation principles that nomadic peoples developed through centuries of experience. The ability to determine position and direction using external reference points, to plan routes that account for terrain and conditions, and to adapt travel plans when circumstances change requires skills that were essential to nomadic survival. The weather prediction systems that help modern societies prepare for natural disasters employ observation and analysis techniques that were refined by peoples who depended on accurate environmental forecasting for their survival. The ability to read subtle signs of changing conditions, to interpret complex patterns of cause and effect, and to make reliable predictions despite incomplete information requires the same kind of environmental wisdom that nomadic societies possessed. The agricultural systems that feed modern populations continue to benefit from plant and animal breeding techniques that were developed by nomadic peoples over countless generations. The horses, cattle, and sheep that form the foundation of modern agriculture carry genetic improvements that were achieved through careful selection and breeding by nomadic herders who understood these animals better than any settled populations ever could. The medical knowledge that helps modern humans maintain health and treat disease includes insights that were first discovered by nomadic peoples who had to maintain their well-being without access to permanent medical facilities. The use of plant-based medicines, the understanding of the relationship between physical activity and health, and the recognition of the importance of psychological well-being for physical survival all reflect knowledge that was accumulated over generations of nomadic experience. Even the entertainment industries that provide relaxation and inspiration for modern audiences continue traditions that were established during the nomadic period. The epic stories that capture audiences in theaters and through digital media employ narrative techniques that were developed by oral traditions that preserved cultural memory in societies without written records. The music that provides emotional expression and cultural continuity in modern societies draws on traditions that were enriched during the Great Migrations when diverse musical cultures encountered and influenced each other. The instruments we play, the scales and rhythms we prefer, and the emotional associations we make with different musical forms all carry influences that can be traced back to the cultural syntheses that occurred during periods of nomadic dominance. The sports that provide physical challenge and community entertainment in modern societies echo the competitive activities that maintained fitness and social cohesion in nomadic communities. The team coordination required for success in modern sports reflects the same skills that enabled nomadic peoples to hunt successfully and coordinate military operations. As the night deepens around us and the modern world settles into temporary quietude, these countless connections between ancient and contemporary life remind us that we are not isolated in time, but part of a continuous human story that stretches back through countless generations to the earliest human communities. The electric lights that illuminate our cities tonight perform the same function as the fires that once warmed nomadic camps scattered across the steppes. They create islands of human warmth and security in the vast darkness, gathering places where communities can form and culture can flourish despite the challenges of an uncertain world. The roads that connect modern communities follow routes that were often first established by nomadic peoples who understood the natural patterns of landscape and weather that make travel possible. The bridges that span rivers and valleys employ engineering principles that were first tested by nomadic peoples who had to move their entire communities across challenging terrain. The laws that govern modern societies reflect concepts of justice and social organization that were refined in nomadic communities where survival depended on maintaining fairness and cooperation despite the constant pressures of movement and change. The recognition that authority must be earned through competence and service, that communities must balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, and that laws must be flexible enough to address changing circumstances all reflect insights that were fundamental to nomadic governance. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the pace of modern life temporarily slows and the artificial urgency of contemporary concerns fades into perspective, it becomes easier to sense these deep connections that link us to the nomadic peoples whose brief dominance of European politics created influences that continue to shape our world. The dreams that come to us in these peaceful hours may carry echoes of ancestral memories, genetic recollections of migrations and adventures that helped create the complex heritage we have inherited. In the landscape of sleep, where conscious barriers dissolve and deeper patterns of consciousness emerge, we may glimpse the vast steps where our human story began and sense the continuing presence of those whose achievements made our current life possible. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of this great continuity, that the breath you draw connects you to the wind that once filled the sails of nomadic migrations, that the blood in your veins carries the genetic wisdom of countless ancestors who faced and overcame challenges we can barely imagine. Let the rhythm of your heartbeat echo the ancient rhythms of hoofbeats that once carried nomadic peoples across continents and centuries, connecting distant lands and diverse cultures in the great human adventure of discovery, adaptation, and survival. In the gentle darkness that surrounds you, feel the presence of all those who have contributed to the ongoing human story, nomadic and settled, famous and forgotten, whose collective achievements have created the foundation upon which our contemporary civilization rests. Sleep peacefully, knowing that their story continues in you, that their courage, wisdom, and adaptability live on in the countless daily choices through which modern humans continue to meet the challenges of existence with creativity, cooperation, and hope. The Great Migration may have ended centuries ago, but the human journey of which it was part continues, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of all who have walked this path before us toward a future that, like the distant horizons that beckon to ancient nomadic peoples, remains full of both promise and mystery. In the deep silence of the night, where time seems to slow and the boundaries between past and present grow thin, we can sense the vast tapestry of human experience of which we are all threads. Each life, no matter how brief or seemingly insignificant, adds its unique pattern to the great weaving that connects all human generations across the centuries. The Hun warriors who once thundered across the steppes, the Gothic farmers who fled before them, the Roman diplomats who negotiated with them, and the countless unnamed individuals who lived through those turbulent times all contributed threads to this magnificent tapestry. Tonight, as you rest in comfort and security that would have seemed miraculous to those ancient peoples, you are adding your own thread to this continuing pattern. Your dreams, your memories, your hopes and fears all become part of the great human story that began when our species first learned to work together, to communicate complex ideas, and to pass wisdom from one generation to the next. The genetic sequences that determine your physical characteristics carry information that has been transmitted across vast distances and through countless generations. Some of these genetic messages originated in the steppes of Central Asia, carried westward by nomadic migrants who could never have imagined the distant destinations their biological inheritance would eventually reach. Others trace their origins to settled populations who learned to adapt their way of life to the presence of nomadic neighbors. In your cellular structure, in the very molecules that make up your being, you carry a biological library that preserves the history of human migration, adaptation, and survival. This library contains information about ancestors who faced ice ages and climate changes, who learned to domesticate animals and cultivate plants, who developed languages and created art, who built civilizations and survived their collapse. The neural pathways in your brain, shaped by both genetic inheritance and personal experience, process information using cognitive strategies that were refined over countless generations of human problem solving. The way you recognize patterns, make decisions under uncertainty, and adapt to changing circumstances reflects mental processes that enabled your ancestors to navigate unfamiliar territories and overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The languages you speak carry within their vocabulary and grammar the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human communication. Words that describe concepts of leadership, loyalty, courage, and community often trace their origins back to the cultural encounters that occurred during the Great Migration period. The metaphors you use to understand complex ideas, the stories you tell to make sense of your experience, and the songs you sing to express emotion all draw on traditions that were enriched during the age of nomadic dominance. The social skills that enable you to form relationships, coordinate activities with others, and maintain communities despite differences of opinion and interest reflect capabilities that were essential to the survival of both nomadic and settled peoples. The ability to read social signals, to negotiate conflicts, and to balance individual desires with collective needs requires the same kind of emotional intelligence that enabled diverse peoples to coexist within the multi-ethnic confederations that once dominated Eurasia. The creative impulses that drive you to seek beauty, meaning, and expression through art, music, literature, and other forms of cultural production continue traditions that were maintained even during the most challenging periods of human history. The Hun warriors who carried decorated weapons and wore ornate jewelry understood the same human need for beauty and symbolic meaning that motivates contemporary artists and craftspeople. The spiritual longings that lead you to seek connection with something larger than yourself echo the religious and philosophical traditions that sustained human communities through countless generations of change and uncertainty. The shamanic practices of nomadic peoples, the monotheistic traditions of settled civilizations, and the philosophical systems developed by urban intellectuals all attempted to address the same fundamental questions about the meaning and purpose of human existence. In the quiet darkness of your bedroom, surrounded by the accumulated products of thousands of years of human innovation and creativity, you are connected to all those who have sought rest and renewal in the face of life's challenges. The bed that supports you employs technologies of comfort and durability that reflect centuries of experimentation and improvement. The roof that shelters you incorporates architectural principles that were tested in environments ranging from nomadic tents to urban palaces. The security that allows you to sleep peacefully depends on social institutions that preserve order and protect individual rights. These institutions, though they have evolved considerably over the centuries, still reflect insights about human nature and social organization that were first developed by communities that had to maintain cooperation and justice despite the constant pressures of survival in challenging environments. The economic systems that provide the resources necessary for your daily life employ principles of exchange, specialization, and coordination that were pioneered by peoples who had to maintain trade relationships across vast distances and cultural boundaries. The money you use, the markets you participate in, and the employment that provides your livelihood all reflect organizational innovations that can trace their origins back to the complex economic relationships that sustained ancient confederations and empires. The educational opportunities that have shaped your knowledge and skills continue traditions of teaching and learning that enabled human communities to preserve and transmit essential information across generations. The schools you attended, the books you have read, and the informal learning experiences that have contributed to your understanding all participate in the great human project of cultural transmission that has enabled our species to accumulate wisdom and capability over time. The medical knowledge that helps maintain your health and treat illness when it occurs represents the culmination of countless generations of observation, experimentation, and discovery. Some of this knowledge originated with nomadic peoples who developed sophisticated understanding of medicinal plants, surgical techniques, and the relationship between physical and mental health. Other insights came from settled populations who could maintain permanent facilities for treating the sick and training healers. The technologies that enhance your daily life, from the simplest tools to the most complex electronic systems, represent the accumulated innovation of human communities that faced practical challenges and developed creative solutions. The smartphone that connects you to distant friends employs principles of communication and information processing that were first explored by peoples who had to coordinate activities across vast distances without modern transportation or communication technologies. The transportation systems that enable you to travel easily between distant locations follow routes that were often first established by nomadic peoples who understood the natural pathways that made movement possible across challenging terrain. The airports where modern travelers gather echo the ancient function of oases and trading posts where diverse peoples met to exchange goods, information, and cultural influences. The entertainment that enriches your leisure time continues traditions of storytelling, music, and performance that served essential social functions in ancient communities. The movies you watch, the books you read, and the games you play all employ narrative techniques and psychological insights that were developed over countless generations of human creativity. The food you eat represents a remarkable synthesis of agricultural knowledge, culinary techniques, and cultural preferences that reflect thousands of years of experimentation and refinement. The crops that provide your basic nutrition were domesticated by ancient farmers who learned to select and breed plants for desirable characteristics. The cooking methods you use were developed by countless generations of cooks who learned to combine ingredients in ways that were both nutritious and appealing. Even the water you drink has been purified using technologies that reflect centuries of accumulated knowledge about public health and environmental management. The systems that deliver clean water to your home and remove waste products employ engineering principles that were first explored by civilizations that learned the importance of sanitation for maintaining healthy communities. As you lie in the comfort of your bed, breathing air that has been purified by natural processes that have operated for billions of years, you are participating in the same fundamental biological rhythms that sustained all your ancestors. The oxygen you breathe was produced by photosynthesis performed by plants whose ancestors provided the foundation for life on Earth. The carbon dioxide you exhale will be absorbed by plants that will use it to grow and reproduce, continuing the great cycles of life that connect all living things. The water that comprises most of your body has traveled through countless organisms and environments over the billions of years since it first formed on our planet. The atoms that make up your tissues were forged in the hearts of ancient stars and have been recycled through countless forms of life. In a very literal sense, you are made of stardust, connected not only to all other human beings but to all life on Earth and indeed to the cosmic processes that continue to shape our universe. The dreams that will soon carry you into the landscape of sleep may reflect not only your personal experiences and concerns, but also deeper patterns of imagery and symbolism that connect you to the collective unconscious of our species. The archetypal figures that appear in your dreams, the hero, the wise elder, the sacred animal, the journey to unknown lands, echo themes that appear in the mythologies and oral traditions of peoples throughout the world and across all historical periods. In the realm of dream, the rational boundaries that normally separate past from present, self from other, and possible from impossible become fluid and permeable. The nomadic warriors who once rode across the steppes may appear as figures in your dreams, not as historical reconstructions, but as living symbols of the courage, adaptability, and determination that enabled your ancestors to survive and thrive despite seemingly impossible challenges. The landscapes that unfold in your dreams may echo the environments that shaped human development over countless millennia. The savannas where our species first emerged, the forests that provided shelter and resources, the rivers that offered transportation and sustenance, the mountains that served as refuges and vantage points, and yes, the vast grasslands where nomadic peoples learned to live in harmony with the rhythms of season and migration. The emotions you experience in dreams, fear and courage, love and loss, hope and despair, joy and sorrow, connect you to the full range of human experience that has characterized our species throughout its existence. The nomadic peoples who created the great confederations experienced these same emotions as they faced the challenges of survival in harsh environments. The joy of successful hunts and battles, the grief of losing loved ones, and the hope of finding better territories and opportunities for their children. The relationships that appear in your dreams, family bonds, friendships, romantic connections, conflicts with rivals, cooperation with allies, reflect the same social dynamics that enabled human communities to form and maintain themselves despite the constant pressures of survival. The political intrigues that played out in Attila's court, the military partnerships that held confederations together, and the cultural exchanges that enriched nomadic society all represent variations on themes that continue to characterize human social life. In the deepest phases of sleep, when consciousness withdraws from active engagement with the external world and turns inward to the mysterious processes of memory consolidation and psychological integration, you participate in biological rhythms that connect you not only to all other human beings, but to all forms of life that experience cycles of activity and rest. The horses that carried Hun warriors across the steppes experienced the same basic sleep patterns that restore your energy and maintain your mental health. The neural processes that occurred during sleep, the strengthening of important memories, the elimination of unnecessary information, the creative recombination of existing knowledge into new insights, reflect the same principles of learning and adaptation that enabled nomadic societies to preserve essential knowledge while remaining flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. The physical restoration that occurs while you sleep employs biological mechanisms that were refined over millions of years of evolution. Your immune system becomes more active during rest, fighting off infections and repairing cellular damage. Your muscular and skeletal systems recover from the stresses of daily activity. Your cardiovascular system adjusts its operations to support the lower activity levels of sleep while maintaining the circulation necessary for cellular function. All of these processes connect you to the great web of life that has sustained biological complexity on our planet for billions of years. The same fundamental mechanisms that maintain your health and consciousness also sustain the nomadic peoples who created such remarkable achievements during their brief period of historical dominance. As the night deepens around you and your conscious mind gradually releases its hold on the concerns and activities of the day, allow yourself to sink into the profound peace that comes from recognizing your place in the great continuity of human experience. You are not alone in time or space, but connected through countless visible and invisible threads to all who have come before and all who will come after. The Hun warriors who once seemed so foreign and frightening to settled populations were, in the end, human beings like yourself, driven by the same fundamental needs and desires that motivate all human behavior. They sought security for their families, respect for their achievements, meaning in their struggles, and hope for their future. Their methods may have differed from those employed by settled peoples, but their underlying humanity was identical to your own. In recognizing this common humanity, you joined the great project of human understanding that has enabled our species to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles and achieve remarkable feats of cooperation and creativity. The empathy that allows you to understand and connect with people separated from you by vast distances of time and culture reflects the same capacity for social connection that enabled the most diverse populations to coexist within the great nomadic confederations. Sleep now in the peace that comes from understanding your place in the vast story of human experience. Let your breathing slow to match the ancient rhythms of rest and renewal that have sustained life through countless generations. Feel your heartbeat echo the pulse of biological processes that connect you to all living things and to the cosmic forces that continue to shape our universe. In the gentle darkness that embraces you, surrounded by the love and protection of countless ancestors whose struggles and achievements made your life possible. Sink into the restorative depths of sleep, knowing that their story continues in you, and through you into a future bright with possibility and rich with the accumulated wisdom of all who have contributed to the great human adventure. The steppes are quiet now, the ancient battles long concluded, the great migrations completed. But in your dreams tonight, in the mysterious realm where consciousness touches the deepest patterns of existence, the eternal human story of courage, adaptation, and hope continues its endless unfolding, carrying you gently into peaceful rest on the breath of winds that have blown across all the landscapes of human history and will continue to carry the dreams of future generations toward horizons that remain forever bright with promise. In the liminal space between waking and sleeping, where thoughts become fluid and the boundaries of individual consciousness expand to touch something larger and more enduring, you may sense the presence of all those who have shared the fundamental human experience of seeking rest after a day of struggle and effort. The weariness you feel in your muscles and bones is the same fatigue that settled into the bodies of nomadic warriors after long days in the saddle, of Gothic farmers after harvesting their crops, of Roman diplomats after tense negotiations in foreign courts. The pillow that cradles your head tonight serves the same function as the leather saddles that provided rest for Hun riders during their brief respites on endless journeys, the bundled cloaks that cushion the sleep of refugees fleeing across dangerous territories, the simple straw pallets that offered comfort to medieval monks preserving knowledge through dark times. All sought the same blessed release from consciousness that allows the body to heal and the mind to process the complex experiences of existence. Your eyelids grow heavy with the same gravitational pull that has drawn countless billions of human beings into the restorative embrace of sleep throughout the long history of our species. This irresistible descent into unconsciousness connects you to every parent who ever sang a lullaby to soothe a restless child, every storyteller who ever wove tales to carry listeners into peaceful dreams, every healer who ever recognized that rest is the foundation of all recovery and renewal. The steady rhythm of your breathing begins to synchronize with the deeper rhythms of the natural world that sustained all human civilizations. Your breath flows in harmony with the wind that bends the grass on steppes where archaeological sites preserve the traces of ancient encampments. Each exhalation carries away the tensions and concerns of contemporary life, while each inhalation draws in the timeless peace that comes from recognizing your connection to the great cycles of existence that have operated since life first emerged on our planet. In the gradually deepening darkness behind your closed eyelids, images begin to form that connect your personal experience to the vast reservoir of human memory. You may see vast landscapes stretching beyond the horizon, pathways worn by countless travelers seeking new homes and opportunities. These are not merely products of imagination, but echoes of ancestral memories preserved in the deepest structures of human consciousness, genetic remembrances of journeys that shaped the development of our species. The faces that appear in these twilight visions may belong to people you have never met, but whose lives intersected with the great currents of history that eventually led to your existence. A Hun warrior adjusting his bowstring before battle, his weathered features reflecting years of hardship, but also the quiet confidence that comes from mastering essential skills. A Gothic woman preparing food for her family, while listening anxiously for sounds that might indicate approaching danger, her hands steady despite her fears because survival depended on maintaining normal routines even in extraordinary circumstances. A Roman scribe carefully recording the terms of a treaty with barbarian leaders, his precise handwriting preserving agreements that would determine the fate of thousands, perhaps millions of people. His concentration absolute because he understood that the accuracy of his work could mean the difference between war and peace, between prosperity and devastation for the communities he served. These figures from the distant past are not strangers, but family, connected to you through the intricate web of human relationships that spans continents and centuries. The genetic material they passed down through countless generations contributed to your physical characteristics, while the cultural innovations they developed and preserved became part of the accumulated human knowledge that shaped your education and worldview. The emotions they experienced in their daily lives, hope and fear, love and loss, pride and humility, courage and uncertainty, are the same emotions that color your own experience of existence. The fundamental challenges they faced, finding adequate food and shelter, protecting their families from danger, maintaining relationships with friends and allies, creating meaning and purpose in the face of uncertainty, are challenges that continue to define the human condition in every era. As your body settles more deeply into the comfort of your bed, sinking into the soft embrace of mattress and pillows that represent thousands of years of innovation in creating conditions conducive to rest and recovery, you participate in the same biological imperative that drove all your ancestors to seek shelter from the dangers and discomforts of the external world. The safety you feel tonight was purchased through the struggles and sacrifices of countless generations who fought to create and preserve the stable social institutions that protect individual security. The walls that surround you employ architectural principles that were tested in environments ranging from the felt tents of nomadic encampments to the stone fortifications of medieval cities. Each innovation in construction technology, each improvement in materials and techniques, each refinement in design reflected the accumulated experience of builders who learned from both successes and failures to create increasingly effective shelter for human communities. The systems that provide heat, light, and ventilation for your sleeping space represent the culmination of millennia of experimentation with ways to modify indoor environments to support human comfort and health. The nomadic peoples who mastered the art of maintaining warmth in portable shelters, the settled populations who developed techniques for heating permanent buildings, and the urban civilizations that created infrastructure for large populations all contributed knowledge to the technologies that ensure your comfort tonight. Even the clothing you wear to bed reflects the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who learned to select, process, and work with natural materials to create protection from the elements. The fibers that keep you warm may have originated with plants domesticated by ancient farmers or animals bred by nomadic herders whose understanding of genetics and selective breeding far exceeded their formal education in these subjects. The water that flows when you turn a tap represents one of humanity's greatest achievements, the creation of systems that can reliably deliver clean, safe water to individual homes. This achievement required not only engineering expertise, but also social cooperation on a scale that would have seemed impossible to ancient peoples. The Romans who built aqueducts to supply their cities, the medieval towns that dug communal wells, and the modern municipalities that created water treatment facilities all participated in the great project of ensuring that basic human needs could be met reliably and efficiently. The food stored in your kitchen represents an even more remarkable achievement: the development of agricultural and distribution systems that can feed large populations with diverse, nutritious foods available year-round. The nomadic peoples who domesticated horses and cattle, the settled farmers who developed techniques for growing grains and vegetables, the traders who created networks for moving food products across long distances, and the modern agricultural scientists who continue to improve crop yields and nutritional quality all contributed to the abundance that allows you to go to sleep without worrying about where tomorrow's meals will come from. As your mind drifts further from active engagement with immediate concerns and begins to explore the deeper currents of memory and imagination, you may find yourself walking along pathways that seem familiar despite being unlike any landscape you have experienced in waking life. These dream paths may follow routes that your ancestors traveled during the Great Migrations, following river valleys and mountain passes that provided safe passage across dangerous territories. In these dream journeys, you may encounter groups of travelers whose clothing and equipment mark them as belonging to different eras and cultures, yet whose essential humanity makes them immediately recognizable as kindred spirits. A Hun family leading their horses toward better grazing lands, their possessions carefully arranged on pack animals trained through generations of selective breeding to carry heavy loads across difficult terrain. Their children playing games that develop the coordination and quick thinking that will be essential for survival in adulthood, their laughter echoing across valleys that have heard similar sounds for countless centuries. A Gothic community establishing a new settlement in territory recently vacated by other peoples, their careful planning reflecting hard-won knowledge about what factors determine whether a community will thrive or fail in unfamiliar surroundings. Their leaders consulting with elders whose memories preserve information about similar ventures, both successful and unsuccessful, while younger members scout the surrounding area for resources and potential dangers. A Roman merchant caravan carrying luxury goods along trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world with the distant regions of Central Asia, their guards alert for signs of bandits, while their guides navigate using knowledge passed down through generations of professional travelers. The merchants themselves calculating profits and risks with the same entrepreneurial spirit that drives modern business enterprises, while their interpreters facilitate communication between peoples whose languages and customs differ dramatically. In the dreamscape where these encounters occur, the normal barriers of language, culture, and historical period become permeable, allowing direct communication between minds that share fundamental human concerns despite surface differences. You may find yourself understanding without words the hopes and fears of these ancient travelers, their dreams for their children, their memories of loved ones left behind, their determination to create better lives despite the dangers and uncertainties they face. These dream meetings are not mere fantasies, but genuine connections to the collective memory of our species, encoded in genetic structures that preserve not only physical characteristics, but also behavioral patterns and emotional responses that proved essential for survival across countless generations. The courage that enabled nomadic peoples to venture into unknown territories, the curiosity that drove them to explore new possibilities, the loyalty that bound communities together during times of crisis. These qualities live on in you and in all their descendants. The landscapes through which your dream journeys carry you may shift and blend in ways that reflect the fluid nature of nomadic experience, where home was not a fixed location, but wherever the community happened to be at any given moment. Grasslands may give way to forests, mountains to deserts, rivers to oceans, as your unconscious mind explores the full range of environments that shaped human development and continue to influence our psychological relationship with the natural world. In these shifting dreamscapes, you may experience directly the nomadic understanding that adaptability and flexibility are more valuable than attachment to specific places or possessions. The ability to find beauty and meaning wherever life's journey leads, to create community and culture under any circumstances, to maintain hope and purpose even when familiar landmarks disappear. These insights represent some of humanity's most precious wisdom, earned through millennia of experience with change and uncertainty. The animals that appear in your dreams may carry special significance as representatives of the partnerships between humans and other species that made nomadic life possible. Horses, whose speed and endurance enabled people to travel vast distances and whose intelligence made them genuine partners in the nomadic enterprise. Cattle and sheep, whose milk and meat provided nutrition while their wool and hide supplied materials for clothing and shelter. Dogs, whose loyalty and hunting skills made them indispensable companions for peoples who lived in constant movement. These animal partners represent more than mere utility. They embody the complex relationships between human communities and the natural world that sustained life for our ancestors and continue to be essential for our survival today. The mutual dependence between humans and domestic animals created bonds of cooperation and care that demonstrated our species' capacity for forming beneficial relationships across the boundaries of species and natural selection. Even in your dreams, you may find yourself caring for animals that depend on you for their survival, while simultaneously depending on them for yours. This reciprocal relationship reflects one of the most important lessons of nomadic life, that true security comes not from dominating the environment, but from learning to live in harmony with natural systems and cycles. The weather that affects your dream journeys, the warmth of sunshine, the cooling effect of gentle breezes, the refreshment of light rain, the challenge of storms that must be weathered with patience and preparation, represents the complex relationship between human communities and the atmospheric conditions that influence all life on Earth. The nomadic peoples who lived their entire lives in direct contact with weather patterns developed sophisticated understanding of meteorology that enabled them to predict changes and adapt their activities accordingly. This intimate relationship with natural cycles created a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of all natural phenomena and the importance of maintaining balance between human activities and environmental sustainability. The wisdom embedded in traditional ecological knowledge continues to be relevant as modern societies grapple with environmental challenges that require the same kind of careful observation and adaptive management that characterized nomadic approaches to resource use. As the night progresses and your sleep deepens, your dreams may carry you to gathering places where peoples from different eras and cultures come together to share stories, knowledge, and cultural traditions. These dream assemblies represent the human impulse toward communication and learning that has driven cultural development throughout history and continues to motivate contemporary efforts to preserve and transmit valuable knowledge. In these imagined gatherings, you may hear epic tales of great journeys and heroic deeds, songs that preserve historical memories in forms that can be easily remembered and passed along, wisdom teachings that distill practical knowledge into memorable aphorisms and metaphors. The storytellers who appear in these dream meetings represent the crucial role of oral tradition in preserving cultural continuity across generations and geographical distances. The music that accompanies these dream gatherings may blend instruments and styles from many different traditions, creating new combinations that reflect the creative synthesis that occurs whenever diverse cultures encounter each other. The drums that mark the rhythm for dancing may echo the sound of hoofbeats on the steps, while flutes and strings provide melodies that seem to capture the vastness of landscapes and the depth of human longing for connection and meaning. The dances performed in these dream celebrations may tell stories of migration and settlement, of battles won and lost, of seasonal cycles and life transitions that connect human experience to the broader patterns of existence. The participants in these dances, representing peoples from across time and space, move together in patterns that demonstrate the universal human capacity for cooperation, creativity, and joy even in the face of life's inevitable challenges. As your participation in these dream festivities continues, you may discover that you possess knowledge and abilities that surprise you. The capacity to understand languages you have never studied, to perform skills you have never practiced, to recognize places you have never visited. These experiences reflect the deep connections that link all human consciousness through what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of human experience that transcends individual identity and cultural boundaries. In the deepest phases of sleep, when dreams give way to the dreamless rest that provides the most profound restoration and renewal, you may experience a state of consciousness that connects you directly to the fundamental peace that underlies all existence. This peace is not the absence of activity, but the presence of perfect balance, the harmony that emerges when all forces are in proper relationship with each other. This is the peace that the nomadic peoples sought when they followed their herds across endless grasslands, not knowing what they would find but trusting in their ability to adapt to whatever circumstances arose. It is the peace that sustained communities through the hardships of migration, the uncertainties of establishing new settlements, the challenges of maintaining cooperation among diverse groups with different traditions and interests. It is the same peace that allows you to release conscious control and trust in the biological processes that will restore your energy, consolidate your memories, and prepare you for tomorrow's challenges. In surrendering to sleep, you participate in the same fundamental act of faith that enabled all your ancestors to rest despite the uncertainties that surrounded their lives. The silence that envelopes you in the deepest sleep is not empty, but full of potential, full of connection, full of the quiet presence that sustains all existence. In this silence, the boundaries between self and other, past and present, human and natural, dissolve into the unity that mystics of all traditions have recognized as the ultimate reality underlying the apparent diversity of manifest existence. Rest now in this perfect silence, knowing that you are held safely in the great web of being that connects all things across space and time. Let the ancient winds that once carried nomadic peoples across continents now carry you gently through the landscapes of sleep toward the renewal that awaits in tomorrow's dawn. Sleep peacefully, beloved child of the steppes, inheritor of the courage and wisdom of countless ancestors. contributor to the ongoing human story that continues to unfold with each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of existence. The great circle of being turns slowly through the night, carrying you and all the world toward new possibilities, new adventures, new opportunities to express the eternal human spirit of exploration, adaptation, and hope. In the infinite gentleness of this turning, find the perfect rest that restores and prepares, knowing that when you wake, you will carry forward the accumulated strength and wisdom of all who have walked this path before you into whatever adventures await in the unfolding story of human consciousness on its eternal journey toward greater understanding, compassion, and unity.